Listening section. Listen to part of a lecture in a biology class.
So today we're going to spend the first part of class talking about Wallacea, a very unique zoogeographic region. You may have noticed that your textbook mentions zoogeographic regions. These are areas of distinctive animal life or fauna. The book discusses the examples of the Neotropical and Ethiopian regions, among others. All of these zoogeographic regions are characterized by having a diversity of species that make up a giant gene pool. You may remember from our last class that a gene pool refers to the total genetic material available for a population or species at a given time. The bigger the gene pool for a species, the more genetic material available for that species to evolve and adapt to their environment. And out of this gene pool and the forces of natural selection, we see the evolution of a variety of related species. These species have evolved in relationship to each other, but are different from species in other zoogeographic regions. Move to a different region, and the gene pool, the diversity of species living there, well, that gene pool would be different. Now, Wallacea is such a zoogeographic region, and especially interesting for the huge diversity in a relatively small area. It's located between the Moluccan Islands of Indonesia and the continental shelf of Australia, and it covers a total land area of 347,000 kilometers squared. It's named after Alfred Russel Wallace, the father of animal geography, and whose other claim to fame is that he was developing the theory of evolution at the same time as Charles Darwin. However, Darwin was a little more established and managed to publish it first. The moral of this story, publish or perish. Right, well, back to our point, Wallacea. Okay, so Alfred Russel Wallace spent a lot of time traveling the East Indies, or what is today called Indonesia, where he was studying the biology of the region. Aside from this being a part of the world that is rich in biological diversity, both animal and plant life on land, terrestrial as well as marine life, see, what was unusual to this pioneering biologist, and this is important, what was unusual was the sudden difference in species. Wallace was sailing between the islands of Bali and Lombok, a distance of merely 15 miles, when he discovered a significant and drastic change between the bird families living on the two islands. On the one hand, there were Asian bird species found on Bali, yet just a short distance away on Lombok he found no Asian birds. What he found, on the other hand, were several distinctly Australian species. It was as if there was a line, and not a very thick one, that the birds refused to cross. But it was not only birds. Take mammals, for instance. East of the line, there are placental mammals such as tigers, rhinoceros, and apes, similar to those of the Asian mainland. In contrast to the west, he found marsupials. Now these marsupials are distinct from placental mammals in that female marsupials typically have a pouch in which they rear their young. Well, true explorer and scientist that he was, Wallace was not content to study the birds of Bali and Lombok, but sailed to nearby islands in the East Indies. He marked the channel between the two islands of Bali and Lombok and followed it north, observing species on other islands and discovering what was in fact a distinctive line between zoogeographic regions. What he discovered has been called the Wallace Line in his honor, a dividing line between the species of two large zoogeographic provinces, those of Asia and Australia. In his enthusiasm, Wallace may have exaggerated the distinctness of this line. Other biologists have since adjusted the boundary between the Asian and the Australian regions, as with other zoogeographic regions. Now, this is important. The core areas of a region, their centers, are most distinct, and as you go out from the center, it's fuzzier on the periphery, the edges. We now know that some Asian species have crossed the Wallace Line. These may not be the birds of Bali or the Asian mammals, but other species such as insects. What we see along the line is more of a blending of species as one zoogeographic region meets another. Moving westward from the Wallace Line, there is a gradual reduction in Asian species and an increase in Australian species. So this area, this transition region between the Asian and Australian regions, well, it has subsequently been named Wallacea, a particularly interesting zoogeographic transitional region.
Now get ready to answer the questions. You may use your notes to help you answer.
Number 1. What is the lecture mainly about? Number 2. What is the significance of the Wallace Line? Number 3. Why does the professor mention the islands of Bali and Lombok? Number 4. According to the lecture, which of the following statements about Wallacea are true? Number 5. According to the professor, what is the relationship between a gene pool and a zoogeographic region?
Listen again to part of the lecture, then answer the question.
What he discovered has been called the Wallace Line in his honor, a dividing line between the species of two large zoogeographic provinces, those of Asia and Australia. In his enthusiasm, Wallace may have exaggerated the distinctness of this line. Number 6. Why does the professor say this? In his enthusiasm, Wallace may have exaggerated the distinctness of this line.